actually on the broadcast now. So I am actually, let me go ahead and get my slides up here so that we've got this going here. I'm going to share my screen and go ahead and do this. There we go. So yeah, so the topic is an introduction to Gutenberg. My name is Micah Wood. I am a WordPress developer at Bluehost. So what that means is I spend a decent amount of time contributing to core. I actually get to contribute to Gutenberg as part of that. And I also get to work on some internal stuff with Bluehost, as well as travel around and go to WordCamps and that kind of thing. So my personal website is wpscholar.com, and my Twitter handle is wpscholar. So I'm just going to kind of jump right in here. So as soon as I figure out how to click through, there we go. All right, so I just want to start out with the basics. For anyone who's not familiar with Gutenberg, what is it, is the first question. And ultimately, Gutenberg is the new editing experience for WordPress. And ultimately, the goal for this, as officially written out in the Gutenberg handbook, I believe, the editor will endeavor to create a new page and post building experience that makes writing rich posts effortless. So the idea here is that the classic editor, as it is termed, the way that we've edited WordPress posts up until now, is not really the easiest editing experience. So take something simple that you might want to do, like try to put two images side by side. And that is difficult to do in WordPress today without the help of some other tool to be able to do that. And the idea is that Gutenberg should make that kind of thing pretty easy. So the classic editor, as you're familiar with it, is looks something like this. And so you have your ability to edit a post, put in a title, and there's this just giant content block. And then we have these interesting things called shortcodes that plugins can create, but they're never really documented anywhere. And if you want to know what they do, then hopefully you know where to go to find out more information about how they work and what you can do with them and all that kind of thing. So here we have a shortcode that basically is going to create a button, and that button is going to have text called click here, and it's going to point to essentially my website. So this is an example of the classic editor and kind of some of the shortcomings. Obviously, we don't really know, except by the fact that this shortcode says button, that this is going to end up being a button. However, in the Gutenberg editor, it looks something like this. So it's more of a what you see is actually what you get experience. So when I create a button, it's going to look like a button. And when I click into the button within the editor, it'll actually give me some additional options, such as being able to change the URL. And when it comes to things like shortcodes, instead of having a shortcode, what you actually have is block discovery. So instead of having these obscure shortcodes that plugins register that you know nothing about, unless you happen to be in the know, when you add a new block in Gutenberg, you will get this block discovery panel, essentially, that allows you to see what is available to you. So whatever plugins have registered as new blocks, they will show in this panel, and you'll be able to kind of figure out what is available. And so there's not this per se. Shortcodes is kind of the mystery meat. You don't know it's really there, but there's a lot of power and functionality there if you're aware of it. And this is essentially what Gutenberg is trying to do, is expose some of this stuff so that it's a little more intuitive and easy to build. So we know what it is. So why Gutenberg? Why has, why? So they did a WordPress editor experience survey before they started to build Gutenberg, and they tried to get some basic information to figure out what they needed to build. And ultimately, most people who did content in WordPress, I should say, use the editor daily, while, some people would use it weekly or monthly or less than that. So majority of people who actually work with content in WordPress were using the editor on a daily basis. And obviously, trying to get your work done within the WordPress editor is not the easiest thing. So one of the other things they looked at was how many people have actually installed a plugin that added some sort of features to the existing WordPress editor. And that was a significant number of people. I didn't actually calculate what these percentages come down to, but 708 people said no, 1,855 people said yes, out of all the people that were surveyed. So then they took a look at what the features were that people were adding via plugins. And as you can see, there's this huge chunk where it says shortcodes. So obviously people want the ability to do all kinds of custom things that shortcodes allow you to do. But there's got to be a better way. And obviously Gutenberg is exposing those things so that shortcodes are not this mystery. Now you have your blocks, which are going to be exposed and easily findable via block discovery. Advanced tiny MCE, so some advanced features. Tables, which were something that was definitely not in the classic editor, Gutenberg has in there by default. So we see that come in. And those are kind of the big ones. And then from there, it kind of tapers off into a bunch of different things. So we have Visual Composer, which is a page builder, which really is, I think, at this point known as kind of one of the not so great page builders, because most page builders now that are good don't use shortcodes. And then custom buttons is another one that had a whole chunk there. So obviously making it easy to add buttons. This is something now that is in Gutenberg by default, as well as columns is something that's in Gutenberg by default. The gallery is something that's in Gutenberg by default. So you can see that they took these responses to heart and tried to build something that fit what people were actually using. So a lot of people wonder, well, is this going to, if Gutenberg doesn't go right, is this going to kill WordPress? And I think really, if you look at, Blockbuster versus Netflix, Blockbuster was doing great until Netflix came along and totally changed the paradigm for video rentals. And ultimately, as we can see, Blockbuster has pretty much been killed because of it. I think the big difference when it comes to Gutenberg is that WordPress is not being disrupted by some other company or organization. It is being disrupted by itself, right? So this is an internal innovation that may have some growing pains, but ultimately is going to put us back on track to kind of beat out the competition. So I know that there's a lot of kind of upheaval. Some people are like, yes, it's wonderful. Some people will say it's really bad. But ultimately, I think in the end, we're going to have a better version of WordPress, and I think we're going to come out ahead in the end. So where can I find Gutenberg? So Gutenberg at the moment is a plugin, and that plugin is on WordPress.org, and you can download it and put it onto your site today. Gutenberg is being rolled into WordPress core. Version 5.0 of WordPress, which is the next version of WordPress that will be coming out, is going to be essentially WordPress 4.9.8, which is the WordPress we know and have today, plus Gutenberg. So there's really not going to be anything else added except for Gutenberg to the 5.0 release. I believe, based on the last announcement that Matt Mullenweg had, there are 490,000 sites that are currently running Gutenberg today. So it's actually been tested across more sites, Gutenberg has, than any other WordPress release has ever been tested. So that's why they want to stick to just Gutenberg, because they feel it's been battle tested. Whereas if we add in other features, I think there's a concern that potential bugs related to some of those additions might take away from you know, the smooth release, hopefully, of Gutenberg. So that's where we can get Gutenberg. I'll walk you through the installation when we get to the demo portion. And then, I actually answered this question already. It's coming to WordPress core. Well, actually, I didn't answer it. It's coming to WordPress core soon. So this is the official WordPress 5.0 release schedule. So at the moment, the plan is to have a release for November the 19th. And so kind of a release candidate by November 12th. And October 19th would be the beta release, which I believe is this Friday. So there's a lot of activity behind the scenes to get Gutenberg ready for Friday for a beta. And then, you know, this is the goal here. Now, there was announced that if for some reason it doesn't work out, that the release happens on November 19th, the fallback dates were proposed to be January. So the reason for this is we don't want a version of WordPress that's not ready when everyone's trying to have their Black Friday or Cyber Monday sales, and you know, all their Christmas sales, or all those things that are happening. So the idea is that if that target isn't met, then we'll push back. So that's kind of the schedule at the moment. So we want to take a little bit of time now and actually figure out how to use it. So I'm going to basically do live demo and walk you through that. So we're going to start out with a demo website that I have here. And we're going to jump into the back end. So this is a fresh WordPress installation, doesn't have Gutenberg yet. So this is what happens when you log in. The first thing, and you've probably already noticed this with WordPress 9.8, we had this call out here where we're saying, hey, install Gutenberg, try it out, or you can install the Classic Editor if you're not quite ready. The Classic Editor plugin will basically make sure that if Gutenberg comes out, either you install Gutenberg via plugin or it comes out in WordPress 5.0, if you have the Classic Editor installed, the default is that Gutenberg will not essentially be enabled on your site. It will be disabled. There is an option in the Classic Editor where you can say, hey, I like Gutenberg, but I don't want it enabled by default for everything. So in that case, it will allow you to have the option to create a new post with Gutenberg, but I think the default would be for it to create a new post with the Classic Editor. So that is the Classic Editor for those who aren't ready or just want to be super safe. Otherwise, you can click to install Gutenberg, and that will install the plugin for you now so that you can test it and see if it is something that you want to do. So we're going to go ahead and click install, and it will install it. And then we can click activate. And so this is going to install Gutenberg and activate it. And so now where this puts us is in the Gutenberg demo page, which of course will not be, well, I would assume it wouldn't be in the WordPress 5.0 release. But for now, when you install the plugin, it will give you essentially a short little demo, and it has these tips that will walk you through all of the different features. So what we're going to do, though, is we're going to assume that we are creating a new post, and we're going to take a look at it from here. So ultimately, we're going to create a hello world post, and we are going to create some content. So when we hit enter, so as you can see, what we've done here is we've created a new block. So every piece of content that we type, every paragraph is, when I hover over this hi there text, tells you in the right corner what type of block this is, which is a paragraph. And when you click into it, you get a different state than if you just hover over it. So when you're just looking at it, it looks like it should on the front end. When you hover over it, you get some extra indicators to say, hey, you can move this thing down. You can drag this thing up and down wherever you want it to go. Right now, there's nowhere else for it to go. And when you click into it, you get this toolbar up here with some different options. So things you would expect, like being able to bold or italicize text, be able to add a link, text alignment. There is also the ability here, which is kind of unique to Gutenberg blocks, is the ability to change the block type. So right now it's a paragraph, but if we wanted to change this to a heading, we could do that. We could change this to a quote. We could change this to a list. We could change this back to a paragraph. So these transitions between block types is kind of an interesting concept that allows you to easily convert content. Then we have this ... So if you're familiar with Google, they've kind of standardized on these 3 dots as the options icon. So when you click on this, it will give you some different options. You can remove the block if you want to get rid of it. You can duplicate the block, which is fun. So there we go. We have 2 copies of the same block. We can insert something before or after. And we can also edit as HTML. So if you edit as HTML, there are some cases where that may not be ideal, but with like a paragraph, I think you're mostly safe as long as you just edit the text and don't add extra tags outside of here. I know that can break a few things here, but then you can switch back and forth between the HTML and the visual mode. And then we have the insert before and after. So let's say you wanted to insert something before the block, just hovering over it gives you a plus sign at the top. And of course, after a block, you should be able to just click the plus here. If you want to add something at the very end, there's also a plus button here, which allows you to add a block to the very end of the page automatically. But again, this is just another way that you can say, hey, I want to insert something before or after my block. And then it will give you a new ability here. So this, when you hit the plus here, this is where that block discovery panel comes in. And so here we can collapse down the most used, and we can see all the different types of blocks that are available. So these are all the different classifications. So we have some inline elements. We have common blocks. So these are kind of the core blocks that you might use. Then we have formatting. So for example, if you have code, there's something called a classic block, which I'll explain in more detail later. And we have tables, we have verse, which is for poetry, custom HTML, all that kind of good stuff. We have layout elements, which would be where you do columns. You can insert separators and spacers, page breaks, buttons, your read more functionality that you would be able to split or paginate pages is located here as well. You can actually take a widget and put it into the post. So any of these things will work. There's a shortcode widget, which will just allow you to put in a shortcode. This is typically going to be some sort of a block type shortcode, meaning it's not in line, but it's going to take up, have its own line breaks before and after the shortcode. Let's see. So let's say we want to get rid of this block. We can delete it and jump back into our inserter here. So this is, so there's widgets, and then finally there's embed. So all the different things that you can embed in WordPress. I think a lot of people aren't familiar with the full list of things that you can use, but again, Gutenberg is going to expose all those things for you. You can also search for a block. So if you type YouTube, for example, it's going to filter that list down. So out of all of these, type heading. So it's pretty quick and easy to find something if you know it exists. You don't have to navigate visually unless you want to. If you happen to be a super productive person and like to use Markdown, you can actually type a slash and then start typing the name of the block. Like, let's say we want to do a quote. Then you hit enter, and it will automatically be a quote block. And then you can type your quote in your citation. And I think you would actually have to click out of it to get to a new block. But yeah, you can easily use the slash to pull that list up just using the keyboard, so you don't actually have to use your mouse all the time. So one thing that's important to realize is that there's this is your document panel. So this is the main panel where you can do things like change your visibility or publishing. If you want to publish in the future, schedule it out. You can do that. Use post formats. All these different things that you would normally see in the publish panel are here. The taxonomies that are available will be in these drop downs as well. Your featured image you would set from here, so we can choose a featured image. And your excerpt is moved from down below everything over here to the right. And your discussion options. So anything related to the page as a whole is located here. If you do happen to be running some plugins that have other meta boxes, those should work even though they may not be fully integrated, I guess, to the new way that Gutenberg works. Most standard meta boxes will show below the content. So you should be able to find those below there. And then for each block, you can come in and, well, whatever block is selected, you should be able to see a block panel over here. And so this will give you some options specific to the block that's active at the moment. So, so for a paragraph, we have the text settings. You can change the font size. You can change that or assign a specific value. You can use drop caps. So that's kind of fun because you can get a giant H in there. And the rest of the text will wrap around, assuming it's not a block right under it with really short text like we have it here. And you also have color settings. So here's kind of the standard selection of colors that Gutenberg provides. And you can actually change the background color to be something and then your text color to be something else. And it will tell you, as you can see here, if the color combination doesn't meet the accessibility standards, it will actually tell you. So that's what this little notice down here is saying, is that the color combination might be hard for some people to read. So those who might be colorblind or things like that, having a good differentiation between the background and text color is important. So it actually checks that for you. And so that way you can play around and say, oh, well, you know, maybe I have to be a little bit more bold with my background, and and then we can pass that. So it lets you know how that works out. So we also have an advanced section here where we can add additional CSS classes. Some blocks will allow you to add a custom ID for styling purposes if you wanted to be able to customize those. But when we click over to the quote block, you'll see that there's a lot less that you can do with that. It's kind of a standard block. Let's get into, so anything you've used recently, by the way, will show up on the right-hand side. So I think your 3 most recent used blocks will show here. So as you're going down the page, if you want to use the same types of blocks over and over again, should be pretty easy to do. We are going to add an image block. So as you can see, as I start to type image, there's a few different options that come up. We have a standard image, we have cover image. We're just going to start with an image block. And so it gives me a placeholder by default here. But I'm going to go to the media library, pick out something, and go ahead and insert it into the page. So now that I've got an image, you can see that there's a lot of options here. I can change the image size to maybe large. I can change the image dimension significantly. The alt text, which is important for accessibility, is here. So it's always good to enter that. Man at computer. So all of those things. So you'll notice that when I clicked away, that block panel went away. But usually when you select a block, it'll come back up. Now you can also add a caption here and add computer. And you could add a link to that, or format that text in whatever way you want. So the interesting thing here is that we also have some other options in this little menu here. So if I hit the edit button, it's actually going to take us back up here where we can switch to a different image if we wanted to. So that's how you change the image. If you wanted to change the alignment, you could do a left align or a right align, center align, or default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just put a bunch of text down here. Going to be my own text generator for a second. Whoops. What did I do? I created a link. Remove link. There we go. All right, so we're just going to put a bunch of text in here. Okay, so the point of this is to get enough text in here so that when we create a left-aligned image and maybe make that image 25%, you can see that it's going to actually wrap the text around it. So that's what your left align versus your right align would do, versus your center align, where it'll actually make sure there's no wrapping happening. Or you can go with a large image. So let's say that we decide we want to make this a gallery. We can convert this to a gallery. So now we can upload new images, or we can click edit here to add things to the gallery. Let's say we want all of these things in here, and then we'll update. So now it's going to give us a nice, fun layout. And so I am going to, just for fun here, get rid of that. We'll keep the rest of this. We're going to go ahead and go through the publishing. So I'm going to hit the big blue publish button, and it says, are you ready to publish? It gives you the option on visibility. You can change if you forgot that you wanted to go ahead and schedule it out for the future. You could do that. And it will suggest, maybe you want to add some tags here. So these are the pre-published checks. You can opt out of those if you don't want to see this screen. You hit publish, and so now it is live. If you wanted to change the URL after you've hit publish, you should be able to change that here. Or from now on, whenever you click on the title, the permalink will show here, and you can hit edit and then edit it here as well. So if we just said, we want to call this yo, we can do that. So at this point, any updates, you'll have to hit the update button. It will not reload the page because everything is now done within this. It's essentially a single page application, meaning everything happens, the page doesn't reload, it only does exactly what it needs to do and nothing more. So we can hit this link to view the post, and so this is our post here. So we have our featured image that we set, which is going all the way the full width of the screen. Then here's our content. It looks exactly like we put it in. We have our nice gallery. So as you can see, what you are looking at here is essentially the same, or at least super close to it. Fonts might be slightly off, but it looks pretty much the same as we put in that content. So one of the features of Gutenberg specific themes is being able to make certain elements wider than the actual content area allows. And I should say not allows, but the default width of the content area. So as you can see on the screen, content only goes so wide. and this is for good reason. You don't want this content extending out when you have a sidebar over here. But I have a different theme that is a Gutenberg compatible theme that I will activate. And so now when we look at this post, so now we do have a sidebar, but we are going to get back to our post here, which I guess was this one. Nope, that is not it. This is the one we were working on. So here we have our post. And so now, because this is a Gutenberg compatible theme, it actually supports a few additional options here where we can make this gallery wider. So it extends beyond the normal content area. So what that would look like over here is interesting. This is not a fully compatible Gutenberg theme if it doesn't actually look right. So it should expand wider than it is here. Or being able to go full width, you can actually take this gallery to the very edges of your screen. And this is the problem I think that we're running into now, is that some developers aren't fully aware of all the things they need to do to truly make something Gutenberg compatible. And so whereas we see what we want back here is content going all the way to the edge of the screen, the reality is that's not happening on the front end. So those are the kinds of things you'll need to test if these are features that you're looking for. One other thing to point out is there is a more menu here. And so there's a few cool little features you have. One is the unified toolbar. This is where whatever thing you click on, your toolbar is up here instead of directly over the element that you're working with. So as I click through, you can see this toolbar changes. So that is an option you can toggle on and off. There's also spotlight mode, which is where it will essentially blur out everything that's not active. So when you click on an element, it'll show you the text that's active. If I click over here, it'll show me this and blur everything else out. So that's spotlight mode. There's also full screen mode, where it will get rid of all of the WordPress stuff and just give you, you could actually get much closer to what it should look like maybe on the front end here. Then there's a few other things. One of these is reusable blocks. Reusable blocks is a very cool feature. So let's say we wanted to make our gallery reusable. We can click Add to Reusable Blocks. And when we do that, we can give it a name. We'll just call it Gallery. We'll save it. So now, while nothing changed about this particular block, it is reusable. So if I come down here and I want to add a new block, when I collapse all these, you'll see there's a new thing here at the bottom called reusable, and you can see gallery and even a preview of our gallery that we created here. So we can click it and now we'll have 2 copies of it. Now, of course, this is more helpful when you realize that you can actually go to a different post and insert that. So if we go in to create something new and we come in and we go to our reusable blocks and we enter it in. So now we've used that block on a different page. You can also, from this more menu, one of the options here is manage all reusable blocks. So if you want to see all the reusable blocks that you've created and be able to maybe delete them or work with them in some way, you can go there, and that will take you to this page where you can see all of your blocks. You can actually export and import your blocks from one site to another. If it's you have a collection of blocks that you wanted to reuse, for example, on a different site, you can do that. So lots of cool little features. So let's get back to the post here that we were working on. There we are. So there's also this information icon where it will actually take a look at your content structure and give you information about it. So usually works best when, for example, you have a heading on the page and then maybe somewhere further down you have another heading, and we're going to make it actually a heading. So when you do that, it will show you a discrepancy. Like we jump from an H2 to an H4 without using an H3. It's telling you, hey, you're not actually using the correct heading level here. You might want to fix that. You can actually click on these and it'll jump you to the right spot on the page. So if you're up here and you click, well, it should anyway. So we can correct that to be an H3. And now when we click on this, you can see that it's not complaining anymore about the order of the headings. So this can help you with your SEO, you know, fix little mistakes that you might not notice because of a minor change in font size just by looking at something. This will help you identify those. So additionally, anything you do, there is the undo, redo buttons, and you can use Control-Z to undo, and I believe Control-Shift-Z should redo. And I believe that is, for the most part, a rundown on the features that Gutenberg provides. Obviously, oh, here's a good example of the theme has a custom meta box, and so your standard meta boxes that aren't really Gutenbergified, they'll show up down here and should work the same. So that's kind of a rundown of creating new content with Gutenberg. The other thing that you'll run into is you have content obviously already on a site and you want to convert it to use Gutenberg. So if we take a look at the pages, for example, and we come into the sample page that WordPress creates for you. So what happens is WordPress says, hey, you've got a bunch of content here. We're not going to migrate it or change the content to use Gutenberg for you. We're going to let you do that on your own. That way there's a less of a chance that things will mess up, and you'll get to see the change and review it before you save it. So basically what happens is any existing content gets put in what is called a classic block. So the classic block is a lot like the classic editor or the TinyEMC editor that you have today. There's a few less little features, but for the most part, you can do a lot of the same things, but it's actually a Gutenberg block. So if we look, for example, at the code here, it's just text and a few HTML tags. So the way that you convert content is when you have a classic editor block, you will come in and hit the more options. And this block only will have an option here, convert to blocks. So when you hit convert to blocks, it will actually separate those out. So now we have a paragraph, we have a quote, we have a paragraph, we have a quote, and we have a paragraph. So it did a pretty good job of splitting those things out into the blocks that were appropriate for that content. So now if we look at the code editor, you'll see that there's these comments in here that essentially wrap the Gutenberg block. So this is how WordPress knows that there's a Gutenberg block. So this is saying this is the start of a quote, this is the end of a quote, start of a paragraph, end of a paragraph. So if you ever do jump into the code editor, it's going to be a little bit more clear what type of blocks things are in. So that is essentially what happens when you convert it, is WordPress wraps these comments around your blocks, and that way it can identify what type of block it is and show it appropriately. And as you can see, it did get some different styles because of the way that Gutenberg styles particular blocks. So at this point, though, we haven't actually saved this conversion. And so this is where I think it's very important to bring up that if you hit save and you've just converted to blocks, but you didn't really review it and you maybe missed the fact that there was something that didn't convert correctly, you are now saving content that may not be displayed in the way you want because it didn't convert to blocks entirely correctly. So it is occasionally going to happen where you hit convert to blocks and something goes wrong. Maybe a little piece of content doesn't show up or something like that. A lot of these bugs have been addressed, but it's always better to be safe than sorry and save and not realize that you've lost a little bit of content. So the best way to go about this, just to make sure that everything is working great. So ideally, you'll just review it right here and see that it converted correctly. But if you want to see it on the front end, you can hit preview. As long as you don't hit update, it's not going to save the changes. So you can hit preview, and it will show you this on the front end. So you can review it and make sure everything looks good. And assuming everything looks good, then you can hit your update button and it will officially be split out into blocks, and you can carry on and add blocks in between or at the end or whatever. So that is essentially how you would convert to existing content to be Gutenberg, to use Gutenberg blocks. So we're going to jump back into our presentation here. So considerations when switching to Gutenberg. I think I've somewhat covered this, but we will hit this again just to reiterate. So content conversion. Content will only be converted on demand. So unless you manually go through that process of converting classic block to individual Gutenberg blocks, then the content will persist as it always has. Content conversion is an optional process. So unless there is a good reason for you to convert it, there's actually no real need to convert it. So if you have a large site with lots and lots and lots of pages, you don't need to go through one by one and try to convert them all. You can just opt for converting them whenever you need to go back and edit that content in some way, shape, or form. And as I mentioned, the best way to go about this to be safe is to make sure that before you hit the save button, that you actually review everything and make sure that nothing went wrong during the conversion process. That is the easiest way for you to prevent some sort of, content loss or something like that. So just, pay attention and try to make sure you review before you hit save. So there may be a need to revert changes if something does go wrong and maybe you accidentally did hit the save button. I do recommend that if you are going to be updating to 5.0 or have a large site and you want to use Gutenberg, that you do make sure you back up the entire site just to be safe. You should be doing this anyway. You should have some sort of regular backup that backs up to a third-party location, ideally not on your actual web server where your website lives. And that way, if something goes horribly wrong, you always have a way to find and restore. It's also a good idea if you want to just test out whether Gutenberg is going to work well, given all the plugins you have on your site, things like that, that you have some sort of a staging site to test those changes in. So a lot of times, one of the big concerns is whether or not plugins or themes are Gutenberg compatible in reality. Even though they say they are, sometimes there are issues. So it's good to have a non-production environment where you can test to make sure that all the things work together correctly. And not all sites have page revisions enabled. Sometimes web hosts turn them off. Sometimes developers turn them off. But ideally, you will have some sort of page revisions that allow you to revert your content. If you do happen to save and then realize that you shouldn't have, you should be able to go back to the most recent revision to undo. So that is a good thing to make sure, is whether or not you actually have page revisions enabled, because that's just another way you can roll back if something goes wrong. So we're going to take a look at this. So we have Gutenberg compatible themes. So everyone usually asks where they can get themes that actually work with Gutenberg. So the things you want to look for, as we just saw with the theme that I was demoing with, what you saw in the admin was not what you got on the front end. So you want to make sure that whatever theme you use actually gives you the same thing on the front end as you get on the back end. So I happen to run a theme called Tabor, which is actually built by Rich Tabor from Theme Beans. And he does a really good job of making sure that what you see in the editor is exactly what you get in the front end, fonts and everything. So that's one thing you want to check, and that's probably one of the biggest things, because if a developer hasn't done this well, so that's the first thing I would check if you're trying to find a good theme that uses Gutenberg. As I mentioned, we have these wide blocks, so you can make things wide. So if that's a feature you're looking for, you might want to test for that. And likewise, you can go from wide to full width, so it takes it to the edges of the screen. One of the other things that a Gutenberg compatible theme will have is potentially a custom color palette. So as we saw, we had in the demo, there was a color palette where we had all of these options that you see on the left. If you have a custom theme, they may have a select number of colors that you can choose from. And so they might have narrowed down the color palette just to keep your design nice and clean. And finally, where to find compatible themes. So I've already mentioned ThemeBeans, which is pretty much every theme that is on ThemeBeans is really actually well done, Gutenberg compatible. So that's a good place to look. Another place is WordPress. So all of these, just so you know, all of these are links in the slides. So if you get the slides, you'll be able to click to go here. But essentially, if you go to WordPress theme repository or directory, you can type in Gutenberg and it will narrow those down. I actually pulled the theme that I used in my demo here from that list. And as you can see, it is not really Gutenberg compatible. So again, just take all that with a grain of salt. Theme forests, you can actually check a box for Gutenberg. I think in most cases, you'll probably run into a situation where what you see on the back end isn't always what you get on the front end. The guy who runs ThemeBeans is actually a reviewer for Envato, which is the company behind ThemeForest. And I believe he was telling me at one point that maybe 2 themes actually did a really good job of being compatible with Gutenberg. So again, well, unfortunately with paid things, you can't try before you buy in most cases. And then there's a few themes here that were listed in an article that were actually handpicked. So those should actually be pretty decent. Some of those are in the free repository and so on. So a lot of places you can find them. Here's a few resources. So there's the Gutenberg plugin. There is a handbook on the WordPress.org website for Gutenberg. So some of the basics behind the designs and stuff. And if you happen to be a developer, there's some walkthroughs as well if you wanted to get involved in learning to create blocks for Gutenberg. There's a Gutenberg news site. They will keep you up to date on all the latest Gutenberg stuff. I actually run a Gutenberg Facebook users group with Rich Tabor, the guy behind ThemeBeans. So if you want to, again, easy way to get involved, plugged in with what's happening in Gutenberg, you can do that there. If you do need some sort of support with Gutenberg, this will take you to the plugin forum, support forum. And then here's a little article that'll kind of run through a lot of the features that I walked through for today. So these resources, again, are in the slides, and the link for the slides is in the video that'll be posted. So we'll try to make sure you guys get all that. And lastly, this is our Q&A section. So this is the part where you guys can unmute and ask questions. I've kind of put up some questions you might ask. So inspiration for whatever.
Okay, before we start with questions we might ask, can we thank you, Micah? Because this was great. What did you guys think? Valuable?
Awesome.
Yes. Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Devin at Bluehost, for coordinating this so that we could get somebody in here showing us live what Gutenberg's all about. Are there any questions from the audience before we go to these? Sherlyn has a question. I'm going to repeat it, or you can walk up here and ask.
When you were doing the text wrapping on the photos, can you do a type text wrap?
Meaning like with the drop cap type thing?
No, where you've got a picture centered and you've got text all around it.
Well, that is a good question. I haven't actually, I don't know. There's the one thing, which is the inline image element. I haven't played around with that enough to know if that's possible. I would kind of doubt that would be something that would be built in at the moment, because that, I don't think that's a standard thing. So my first guess would probably be no.
Okay, thanks. Scott's here.
Yeah, Stefan's here. Okay, Amy.
So currently on the classic editor, there's that drop down all the way at the top.
So currently on the classic editor, there's that drop down all the way at the top.
Where you can access revisions, authors.
Where you can access revisions, authors.
And where is that?
And where is that in Gutenberg? How do you change an author?
Sure. So let's see. Let me escape out of this here and pull up the demo again. So how do you change the author?
No.
Well, just see that whole drop down
Or
menu, or
drop
what
down
has it been converted to at the top.
Sure. So let's see.
Are you talking about where you find excerpts? She's talking about on classic version at the very top. There's like options boxes.
I will add a new classic editor page so that we can view it. Okay, so we're talking about screen options. Yes. Okay. Very nice. So the latest 4.0 release of Gutenberg does not have screen options. That is actually currently in the works. So there's a ticket right now that's being worked on with that specific functionality in mind. I believe that it will be a modal that pops up, and should have all the same options that you have in screen options in the next release. So this should be when 5.0 rolls out, it should have screen options.
Okay. Another question?
Yeah.
Walk on up here so he can hear you. Unless you want me to repeat, I can repeat.
Oh, now I can see it too. Am I correct that in Gutenberg, if you convert a page over, the only way to view source mode is one block at a time? You can't see the entire page in source mode?
Okay. She just asked if she were to convert her content to Gutenberg, would she be able to see the source code, or would it only be viewable one block at a time?
So if you go to the More button here and go to Code Editor, this is all of the code on the page here, just like switching to the HTML mode in your normal classic editor. So this will show you everything, all the blocks. You can go one block at a time if you just wanted to edit a specific block, but these are all of them. The only thing I would say is that some blocks are intended to be completely editable and customizable. Other blocks, if you edit them, they will actually go into what is, what do they call it? I'm trying to think of a good example. If I go back to the visual editor and add something like, see, yeah, this one says edit as HTML. So let me add a new block here. I'm going to create something that probably shouldn't be changed, like an audio block, right? So, well, I don't have any audio. Let me, maybe a file. So let's say I wanted to, that's not really a file, but hey, so there we have that. So now this one, it says edit as HTML2. If you have, certain blocks will not allow you to edit the HTML. So then if you go into this code editor and you do edit them, it essentially goes into an invalid state, and then it doesn't recognize the content, and then it tells you it's broken, and then it forces you to either leave it alone or convert it to an HTML, a classic block, I believe. So that's kind of.
Does it let you know ahead of time before you try to edit it, or you find out after?
You have to say it a little bit louder.
Does it let you know beforehand, or do you find out after the fact that it was wrong?
At the moment, find out after the fact. So that is another use case where editing, and then before you hit save, you would definitely want to switch back to the visual. And then if it tells you, hey, this is broken, or it does something like this where it's, oh yeah, that's because we didn't switch back here. Yeah, it'll tell you it's broken. So you could actually, as long as you don't hit save.
You broke up just for a minute there.
But you definitely, say that again?
Micah, can you say that again? You broke up just as you were saying that.
Yeah, so basically, again, kind of if you do edit HTML, make sure you switch back to visual mode before you save. That way, if something does go wrong, it'll be obvious before you save it.
Great, thank you.
Have you seen any instances of trying to edit, like totally blowing up the site and doing anything bigger?
Have you seen any instances where when someone tried to edit, it totally blew up the site?
I haven't. There's some very rare instances where I think a few people have run into something like that, but I'm pretty sure those have been taken pretty seriously, and all the bugs have hopefully been addressed on those by now. So, so it's possible, but yeah, my word of caution is just to make sure you don't hit save until you know you're good to go.
Perfect.
Can you talk a little bit, and I don't know how much Gutenberg would even affect it, a little bit about the load time or the speed, specifically because I'm seeing a couple of different paths to get the same result in using a gallery or reusing the same photos. And the reason I'm specifically asking this is that I have a lady that I deal with her website, and she's a real estate agent, so I could potentially see utilizing the concept of taking the same homes over and over as galleries. I'm not sure how that reuse of galleries would equate to speed and slowing down her site as compared to just putting the individual images the way I'm used to, or even just a gallery like I'm used to thinking of it.
Yes, so the only thing that's really different when you use a reusable block as opposed to putting the content directly in as a one-off is the one-off will just have the content there, and that will load up when the page loads up. The reusable blocks, basically what has to happen is a reference to a reusable block is put into the page. So when WordPress goes to load the page, it will do a lookup for that particular reusable block and call it in. So it shouldn't be a lot of overhead, but you know, I guess if you've got a ridiculously long page with a whole lot of references to reusable blocks, it could probably slow it down. But usually, I doubt you would see much difference with a reusable block versus standard content.
Great.
So does that mean if you use a templated page for a Gutenberg templated page, you still have those blocks that are referenced?
So does that mean that if there was a Gutenberg templated page, you'd still have to reference those blocks?
So the Gutenberg templated pages are a little different because what they do, so Gutenberg does have the concept of templates, and right now it typically just applies for custom post types. You can create your own template, which what that does is it will pre-fill the blocks for the page, but those are actually used once the page is created with the template. The content will actually live directly there, so it's not really a reference at that point. It's just the template's used when the page is created, and then you can manipulate it however you want, or save as is if it happens to have actual content in it, and then it'll just be regular content at that point.
How long do you think before Gutenberg becomes a site builder?
So how long before Gutenberg becomes a site builder? Ultimately, I believe the next phase is to get Gutenberg working within the context of the customizer. And then the next phase beyond that is to start to allow you to use Gutenberg to build actual pieces of the site itself. So think header, footer, sidebars. You could actually build those things with Gutenberg. At that point, I think you're getting to a point where you are starting to get into the realm of, I wouldn't say site builder, I would call it more of a theme builder per se, because you're starting to build out the bits and pieces of the page. Site builder, in my opinion, is actually when WordPress gets into the space of helping you make decisions about the actual pages that you need as well. So I think that's even a step beyond what current page builders do today. Even, I think Elementor and Beaver Builder, they allow you to manipulate and add bits and pieces that will allow you to essentially customize your theme. A site builder, in my view, is something that will allow you to kind of walk through the process of creating a large site and templating out all your pages for you, kind of thing.
Okay, I had a question. You showed us how we could export blocks for another site if we had set up a block that we wanted to use elsewhere. If we were to export all the content from the site into an XML file, would those come along with it, or would we need to do 2 exports now?
So yes, so when you go to Tools, Export, and we'll leave this page here, you'll see blocks as an option here. So if you just want to export all your blocks, your reusable blocks, that's there. If you do all content, it is going to include the blocks as well.
Beautiful. That's great. Okay, any other questions for Micah? Yes, there's 2.
No, I think one of my questions is his first screen he wrote the follow-up question.
Oh, okay.
Does it work with WooCommerce or?
Does Gutenberg currently work with WooCommerce?
I believe at the moment WooCommerce, I haven't looked specifically. I don't do much with e-commerce, so to be honest, I haven't looked much. But from the people that I've talked to, I believe WooCommerce does have Gutenberg integration, meaning that they should have some blocks that are specific to the WooCommerce bits and pieces that you can drop in.
Okay. And then what was your question?
Oh, as far as other builders, if the site has already been created, builder, and you try to
If a site has already been built in another builder, like Beaver Builder, for instance, or Elementor, and then it's converted, is that going to automatically convert to Gutenberg?
So that is where it can get tricky, in that you have page builders that have very specific types of components that you can drop in. And there may be things that you've added that don't have a counterpart in Gutenberg. And so that's where I think some of the content issues can come about. And with all the extra divs and things that a lot of the page builders wrap around their contents, that can potentially confuse Gutenberg. So if it is, yeah, so that's where I would just exercise caution and particularly test even maybe before you install or upgrade, just to make sure it works correctly. But yeah, that is one of the issues. But the nice thing is, again, you could have something that runs on a page builder, and as long as you're continuing to use that page builder, you could create pages that use Gutenberg, and then you could also create pages that use the page builder. So they could technically be used together, but if you wanted to at some point completely switch, that's when you might run into now I have to go manually page by page and make sure this thing converts correctly. So.
Okay. Can you bring your list of questions back to the screen? And then you had a question. Is it that one?
So I use Beaver Builder, and I turned Gutenberg on and off. I will use Gutenberg for blog posts, but it will try and force its way on pages.
That's why I deactivated mine.
Yeah, and I turned mine on.
Micah, what they're talking, can you hear the discussion that's going on? It's
words.
okay. I can
not all.
They're talking about how if you do use such as Beaver Builder in the site and have Gutenberg turned on for posts, how it will try to force the pages, and you have to be careful or it will change the pages over. Currently.
To Gutenberg.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
so there
Yeah,
were
this
just
is
comments.
yeah, this is where I think it would make sense to install the Classic Editor plugin. And then that way, if you wanted to create a page in Gutenberg, you can do so. If not, it defaults to the Classic, which means that your typical page builder options are available.
Good to know.
That was the first question. It's like I have a blog, so I can just keep classic kind of.
Yes, you can say the Classic. Classic becomes a plugin now, correct? That's what you just said?
Yes,
So
it's a
you'll have to
plugin.
download-
It will exist for a while, which I'm imagining in my head to be something like maybe 2 years before they maybe pull it down. So should be plenty of time for Gutenberg and the economy around Gutenberg to kind of evolve to the point where we should be able to have some tooling that would make migrations and that kind of thing easier.
Okay, so that answers that question of can you opt out of Gutenberg once it is in core? Is yes. All right. Anyone? Will it impact my SEO? That's one of your questions.
Yeah. So ultimately, the way that Gutenberg works is it's just another way of editing the content. So when you hit save, WordPress saves your content the same way it always has. And so on the front end of the site, WordPress isn't really doing anything different. It's going to be rendering the same content, whatever content you've put in on the front end. So provided the content hasn't changed, whether you're using Gutenberg or the Classic Editor shouldn't matter. The big difference, I think, is that Gutenberg is going to make it easier to create more dynamic content or media-rich content in your posts that will actually help your SEO. So that's yeah. So that's a good thing. But ultimately, there's no direct impact outside of.
Although you did mention that it will prompt you to make positive changes for SEO as far as headers are concerned.
Yes, that is true. Yeah. So if you happen to actually use that tool to look at your content hierarchy and things like that, then it definitely would help. So, but of course, you might be using something like the Yoast SEO tool, which would do some of that.
Right.
So, it just depends.
Okay. Any other questions or? Okay. What browsers does Gutenberg support?
So at the moment, WordPress and Gutenberg support the same browsers. That's the intent. So I believe it is IE 11 and Edge, and then the 3 most recent versions of other major browsers like Chrome and Firefox and Safari. WordPress actually defines the exact rule set in their package here, which I can pull up real quick.
So if we're using IE 4.0, it won't work? I'm joking.
I would be interested to see you run that on IE4. It's difficult to get a copy of that, I would imagine.
No, it's just they're old and important.
Yeah.
They're old. Okay, get their emails.
So you're showing us where to find the browser compatibility?
Yeah, I just remembered it's actually in here. So there is they actually define in Gutenberg the package that contains all of the browsers. So we look at this, here's the rule set. So anything that gets more than 1% usage that is greater than IE 11 is, so the most recent version of Android, the most recent version of Chrome Android, the last 2 versions of Chrome, 2 versions of Firefox, 2 versions of Safari, 2 versions of iOS, 2 versions of Edge, and 2 versions of Opera. So, and if any one of those has less than 1% usage, then it's excluded, even if it is a more recent version.
Okay. Any more questions? I think we're, yes?
What about accessibility?
What about accessibility? How is Gutenberg addressing that?
Yes, so I have a whole slide on that over here. So
Oh, excellent.
that's my addendum because I figured that would be a hot topic. So yeah, so at this point, Gutenberg is not completely accessible. But for the most part, that should be limited to the admin. So while there might be some very minor impact on the front end, I think most of the impact of the lack of accessibility is going to be within the admin. So for sites that are, trying to meet the 508 compliance for government or universities, that kind of thing, they could get away with the front end being compliant while the back end is not. Matter of fact, one of the big sites that I've helped with, that was the case. But obviously the ideal situation is that the front and back end completely would be accessible. But I think most of the accessibility concerns at the moment are obviously within the Gutenberg editor itself. And so the classic editor uses TinyMCE, and for a long time that wasn't accessible itself. But over time, it's become more and more accessible. And so I think really the situation we're in is we're putting a lot of time and effort into building this new editor, and it's going to take a lot of work to make it accessible. And so the opinion that I drew from this document here was that accessibility is important. Accessibility is something that we continue to work on, but accessibility is not going to prohibit them from releasing Gutenberg on time, which means accessibility or not, we're going to release this. But we will continue to work on Gutenberg's accessibility as time goes on. So I think the opinion at the moment is if you are absolutely dead set on having the editor be accessible, you can continue to use the classic editor until they get Gutenberg to that point.
Okay, thank you. So there's options. And that's really what we've learned, I think, about Gutenberg is there's options. WordPress isn't making us make a choice at this point where we can, or isn't forcing us. We're still allowed to make choices. And that's what's so important. And getting an overview like this, though, was huge for me. Did everyone learn something here tonight just by doing this? This was pretty amazing. Thank you so much. You enriched all of our lives tonight, Micah.
Well, great.
Thank
Glad I
you.
could.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more round of applause. Now, do you want to stick around and hear what else we've learned this month? Or are you going to go to bed? Because I know it's late on the East Coast.
I may hop off here in just a second. I'm trying to figure out how to, apparently the screen share thing won't let me hit the stop broadcast